The wolf would not leave the dungeon. For 3 days, the Alpha King of Sorvain had refused to move from the iron corridor beneath his own castle. His advisors had begged, his generals had threatened. His own mother, the Dowager Queen, had descended those wretched stairs to command her son to return to the surface and fulfill his duty. Cale had not even looked at her. He sat with his back against the cold stone wall, his gaze fixed on the cell at the end of the corridor. His wolf paced beneath his skin, restless and burning, clawing at his ribs with a desperation that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with recognition. Because behind those iron bars, curled on a filthy straw pallet with chains around her wrists, was a girl the kingdom had forgotten existed, and Cale's wolf had already chosen her. The guards whispered about it in the corridors above. The servants traded rumors over washing basins and bread ovens. The noble families who had gathered for the selection ceremony exchanged horrified glances and sharpened their political knives. The Alpha King was supposed to choose a mate tonight. 7 daughters of the most powerful bloodlines in Sorvain stood perfumed and gowned in the great tower above, each one groomed since birth for the possibility of wearing the crown. Treaties hung in the balance. Alliances that would determine the fate of the kingdom for generations waited on a single word from the king's lips. And the king was sitting in filth, staring at a prisoner. Marin did not know why the Alpha King had come. She had heard the footsteps 3 days ago. Heavy, deliberate, nothing like the shuffle of the guards who brought her water and stale bread. She had pressed herself into the corner of her cell, making herself as small as possible, which was a skill she had perfected over the 2 years she had spent in this darkness. Then she had seen his eyes through the bars, golden, blazing, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. He had not spoken, had not explained, had simply lowered himself to the floor outside her cell and stayed. The guards had tried to intervene. Marin had watched through half-closed eyes as 2 of them approached the king with careful words and careful hands. Cale had growled, a sound so low and primal that the stones beneath her seemed to vibrate. And both men had retreated so quickly they stumbled over each other. No one had tried again. Now, on the 3rd night, Marin pressed her cheek against the damp wall and studied the man who had turned her forgotten existence into the most dangerous spectacle in Sorvain. He was enormous. Even seated, his frame dwarfed the corridor. Dark hair fell past his jaw, unkempt in a way that suggested he had not slept or groomed since his arrival. His ceremonial coat, black leather worked with silver thread, was streaked with the grime of the dungeon floor. He looked nothing like the pristine, untouchable king she had glimpsed once, years ago, before the world had swallowed her whole. He looked like a man at war with himself. "You should go," Marin said. Her voice cracked from disuse. She could not remember the last time she had spoken aloud. Cale's eyes snapped to hers. Something flickered in them. Relief, she thought, though that made no sense. "You spoke," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged over iron. "You have been sitting outside my cell for 3 days. Someone should say something." The ghost of something crossed his face, not quite a smile. "My advisors have said plenty." "Then listen to them. Go upstairs. Choose your queen." Marin pulled her knees tighter to her chest, the chains clinking softly. "Whatever you think you are doing here, you are wrong." Cale leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "My wolf has never been wrong. Not once in 28 years. Your wolf does not know me. My wolf knew you before I descended the first step." The words hung in the stale air between them. Marin felt something stir deep in her chest, something warm and treacherous that she crushed immediately. Hope was not a luxury prisoners could afford. Above them, muffled by stone and centuries of silence, a bell began to toll. The selection ceremony was beginning. 7 women waited. An entire kingdom held its breath. And the Alpha King did not move. What no one in Sorvain knew, what Marin herself barely allowed herself to acknowledge, was that she was never supposed to be in that cell. 2 years ago, she had been a healer's apprentice in the castle's lower quarters, quiet, invisible, content to mix poultices and tend to the minor wounds of servants who could not afford the attention of the royal physicians. Then she had healed a dying child with nothing but her hands and a light that poured from her palms like liquid gold. The child's mother had wept with gratitude. The castle steward had watched with calculating eyes. And within a week, Marin had been dragged from her cot in the middle of the night, accused of practicing forbidden magic, and thrown into the dungeon without trial. No one had questioned it. No one had advocated for her. A girl with no family, no house, and no bloodline worth protecting. She had simply vanished, and the world above had closed over the gap like water over a dropped stone. The steward visited her once, a month into her imprisonment. "You will remain here until we determine whether your abilities pose a threat to the crown," he had said, his tone as flat and indifferent as if he were discussing spoiled grain. He never returned. The determination never came. 2 years passed. Marin's world shrank to a 10-foot cell, a straw pallet, and the slow erosion of everything she had once been. And now an alpha king sat outside her bars, claiming his wolf had chosen her, while something inside Marin's chest, something she had believed dead, flickered with a warmth that terrified her far more than the darkness ever had. She pressed her hand to her sternum, feeling the heat pulse beneath her ribs. Whatever this was, it would only bring her more suffering. It always did. On the fourth morning they came for her, not the guards, not the king. A delegation of 5 nobles, led by a woman whose beauty was as sharp and cold as a winter blade. Lady Seraphine of House Dravory, the foremost candidate for queen. The woman the entire kingdom expected Kale to choose, and the woman who now stood before Marin's cell with murder dressed in silk and diplomacy. "So this is what has bewitched our king," Seraphine said, her pale eyes sweeping over Marin's filthy dress, her matted hair, and her chained wrists. "A dungeon rat with hedge magic." Marin said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was the only armor available to the powerless. Seraphine turned to the guard captain who accompanied them. "The council has reached a decision. The prisoner is to be transferred to the eastern outpost before nightfall, for evaluation." Marin's blood chilled. The eastern outpost was a prison colony 3 weeks' ride from the capital. Wolves sent there did not return. It was not an evaluation. It was an erasure. "On whose authority?" the guard captain asked carefully. "The regent council's. The king has been deemed temporarily compromised by an enchantment of unknown origin. Until the influence is removed, the council governs in his stead." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly constructed, that Marin almost admired it. They unlocked her cell with brisk efficiency. Rough hands hauled her upright. A hood was pulled over her head, plunging her back into the darkness she knew so intimately. As they dragged her through the lower corridors, Marin heard shouting from somewhere above. A voice she recognized, deep, ragged, vibrating with fury. Kale. He had been lured away. She understood that now. Someone had drawn the king from his post, and in his absence the vultures had descended. They moved her quickly through passages she had never seen, stone tunnels that smelled of earth and age. A door groaned open. Cold air struck her face. Outside. They were taking her outside. A cart waited. They shoved her into it like cargo, and the wheels began to turn before she had even found her balance. Beneath the hood, Marin pressed her hand to her chest. The warmth that had flickered there for 3 days was fading, stretching thin like a thread being pulled taut across an impossible distance. She did not understand what it was. She only knew that it hurt to feel it weaken. Miles behind her, in the castle of Sorvain, the Alpha King returned to an empty dungeon corridor. The cell door stood open. The chains lay discarded on the straw. Maren was gone. The howl that erupted from the depths of the castle was not human. It shook dust from the rafters of the great hall 3 floors above. It sent the selection candidates stumbling backward in their gowns. It cracked a window in the eastern tower. And every wolf within the walls of Sorvain dropped to their knees as the primal anguish of their alpha washed over them like a tidal wave. The king's wolf had chosen, and someone had stolen his mate. 7 months. That was how long it took for Maren to stop flinching at the sound of footsteps. The eastern outpost had never received her. The cart transporting her had been intercepted 2 days into the journey, not by the king's wolves, but by a band of rogue healers who lived in the vast Thornmere marshes beyond the kingdom's southern reach. They called themselves the Verdant, outcasts, every one of them. Wolves born with healing gifts who had been exiled, imprisoned, or hunted by kingdoms that feared what they could not control. They had sensed Maren's power from miles away, a golden thread pulsing through the marshlands like a heartbeat, and they had come for her the way rivers come for the sea. Their leader, an ancient woman called Dorrit, had removed Maren's chains with hands that glowed faintly green. "You have been caged too long, child," Dorrit had said, her voice like wind through dry reeds. But cages can be unlearned. Maren was not certain that was true. Still, she had tried. The Verdant gave her a small dwelling at the edge of their settlement, a cottage built on stilts above the marshwater, its walls woven from living reeds that whispered when the wind changed direction. They asked nothing of her except that she heal when healing was needed, and rest when rest was possible. She did both, though rest came harder. The nights were the worst. In the darkness, with the marsh sounds filling the silence, Maren would press her hand to her chest and feel the warmth that refused to die. It had not faded during the cart journey as she had feared. Instead, it had settled deeper, burrowing into some fundamental part of her like roots, finding bedrock. She did not know what it was. Dorrit had examined her once, pressing weathered fingers to Maren's sternum with closed eyes. "You carry a bond thread," the old healer had said, pulling back with an expression Maren could not read. Unfinished, unaccepted, but alive. A bond with whom? Dorrit had looked at her for a long time. "You already know the answer to that." Maren did. She simply refused to speak it. Instead, she poured herself into the work of healing. The marshlands were harsh, and the Verdant's small community suffered the injuries of a life lived at the edge of civilization. Maren set bones. She drew infection from wounds. She eased the breathing of children whose lungs struggled with the damp air. And slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, she began to feel like a person again. Her body filled out with proper food. Her hair, washed clean of dungeon grime, fell in dark waves past her shoulders. Her hands, once trembling and pale, grew steady and sure. But the warmth in her chest never quieted. It pulsed strongest at night, throbbing with a rhythm that did not match her own heartbeat. Sometimes she dreamed of golden eyes in the darkness. Sometimes she woke gasping, her skin flushed, the phantom sensation of a wolf's breath against her neck so vivid she would check the shadows of her cottage before she could calm herself. The bond thread, reaching for her across hundreds of miles of forest and mountain and marshland, reaching and never quite arriving. "He is still looking for you," Dorrit said one morning, watching Maren press her hand to her chest with a grimace. "The thread would not burn like that if he had stopped." "Then he is a fool," Maren replied. "He is a king with a kingdom to govern. He should choose his queen and forget the dungeon girl." Dorrit's expression carried the particular patience of someone who had lived long enough to recognize denial. "The wolf does not choose with the mind, child. It chooses with the soul. And a soul that has found its match does not simply forget, because forgetting would be more convenient." Maren turned away, busying herself with her herb preparations. But that night, When the warmth in her chest flared with sudden, almost painful intensity, she did not crush it down as she usually did. She let it burn, and somewhere, impossibly far away, she could have sworn she felt an answering fire. The traders came to the Verdant every few weeks, bringing salt and iron and news from the kingdom beyond the marshes. Marin usually avoided them. The less she knew about Sorvain, the easier it was to pretend she had never existed there. But on a gray morning a few weeks later, a trader's voice carried across the settlement with words that stopped her hands mid-motion over her grinding stone. The Alpha King has dissolved the selection. Marin's pestle slipped from her fingers. She moved to the edge of the gathering where the trader, a weathered man with a cart full of dried fish and gossip, was holding court before a dozen curious Verdant members. Refused every candidate, the trader continued, shaking his head with the relish of someone delivering scandal. 7 daughters of the great houses, and he sent them all home. The noble families are in an uproar. House Dravory has withdrawn from the king's council entirely. They are calling it an insult to every bloodline in the realm. And the king? Dorrit asked from beside Marin. The old woman had appeared silently, as was her habit. Mad, they say. The trader lowered his voice, though his eyes sparkled with the drama. He has torn apart the eastern outpost stone by stone. Personally. With his bare hands and his wolf form. When he found it empty, he executed the commander for losing a prisoner whose transfer he never authorized. Marin's legs weakened. She steadied herself against a post. What prisoner? Someone asked. No one knows. The king will not speak her name. But he has deployed his wolves across every province, every territory, and every village within 100 leagues. They are searching for someone, a woman, and the king has made it very clear that anyone who has harmed her or hidden her will answer to him personally. The trader paused for effect. He has offered 20,000 gold pieces for information. 20,000. The treasury is screaming. The council is threatening abdication proceedings, and the king does not seem to care about any of it. Marin realized her hand was pressed to her chest again. The warmth was surging, pulsing with an urgency she had never felt before. 20,000 gold. He had torn apart a prison with his bare hands. He had dissolved the selection, the political cornerstone of his reign, and set his kingdom on fire, looking for her. For a dungeon rat with hedge magic. Mistress Wren. Dorrit's voice was quiet beside her. The old healer had given Marin the false name herself, and never once asked for the real one. Your hand. Marin looked down. Her palm was glowing. Faint, barely visible in the gray morning light, but unmistakable. Golden light leaked between her fingers where they pressed against her sternum. She clenched her fist and shoved her hand behind her back. It means nothing, Marin said. It means everything, Dorrit countered gently. And I think you know that. That night, Marin lay awake in her reed cottage, staring at the ceiling while the marsh sang its endless chorus around her. He had not chosen another. He had not forgotten. He was burning his kingdom to the ground to find her. And the bond thread in her chest was pulling so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs open. Stop, she whispered to the warmth. To him. To the impossible connection that refused to release her. Please stop. You do not even know me. The warmth flared hotter in response. It felt like an argument. 3 weeks after the trader's visit, the stranger arrived at the Verdant. He came alone, which was either very brave or very foolish in the Thornmere marshes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from hardwood, and then weathered by decades of loyalty. His eyes were dark amber, not the bright gold she had seen through dungeon bars, but close enough to make Marin's pulse stutter when she saw him from her cottage window. He walked directly to Dorrit's dwelling, as if he knew exactly where to go. Marin watched from behind her reed wall, every instinct screaming at her to run. But the marshes offered nowhere to flee to, and something in the way the man moved, careful, deliberate, unthreatening, kept her rooted in place. An hour later, Dorrit came for her. His name is Hadric, the old healer said. He is the king's shield, the highest-ranking wolf in Sorvain beneath the king himself. And he has been searching for you for 7 months. I will not go back, Marin said immediately. Hear him out, child. He carries truths you need. Marin wanted to refuse, but Dorrit's expression held something she had never seen there before: fear. Hadric was waiting in Dorrit's cottage, standing because the low ceiling would not comfortably accommodate his height if he sat. When Marin entered, his eyes swept over her with the quick, thorough assessment of a lifelong soldier. Then, something shifted in his expression. Relief. Raw, undisguised relief. You are alive, he said. Thank the old gods. Barely, and no thanks to Sorvain, Marin replied. Say what you came to say. Hadric nodded, accepting her coldness without flinching. What do you know about why you were imprisoned? I healed a child. The steward called it forbidden magic. I was thrown in a cell. The explanation seems straightforward. The explanation is a lie. Hadric's voice hardened. The steward, Rogan, acted on orders from House Drevori. Specifically, from Lady Seraphine. Marin blinked. Seraphine had me imprisoned? I had never even spoken to her. I was nobody. You were never nobody. Hadric reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, its edges worn from handling. This is a report from the kingdom's genealogist, commissioned by Seraphine's father 3 years ago. It traces your bloodline. Marin took the paper. The words swam before her eyes, but certain phrases leapt from the page. Descendant of the Oraline line, dormant wolf heritage, carrier of the healer's gift, last documented 4 generations prior in the royal bloodline itself. I do not understand, Marin whispered. Your mother was a wolf-born who suppressed her nature and fled the capital before you were born. Your bloodline is not common. It is among the oldest in Sorvain, older even than the Drevoris. And your healing gift is not hedge magic. It is a royal trait that has not manifested in over a century. The document trembled in Marin's hands. Why would Seraphine care about any of this? Because the bond between a true-blooded wolf and an alpha king is not something that can be competed with. Seraphine's family has been positioning her for the crown since she was a child. If you existed freely within the castle, the risk of the king's wolf recognizing you was too great. So they buried you, removed you before the bond could form. Marin's legs gave way. She sank onto Dorrit's bench, her mind reeling. They had not imprisoned her for her magic. They had imprisoned her because of what she was, what she might become. They had stolen 2 years of her life, her freedom, her identity, her sense of self, to eliminate a political threat she never knew she posed. The king knows none of this, Hadric continued. He discovered your existence by accident. 3 months before the selection, a guard rotation error left the dungeon short-staffed. Kale personally inspected the lower levels and found a prisoner with no trial record, no sentencing documentation, and no legal basis for confinement. He demanded answers. None were provided. He began investigating. And then his wolf caught your scent through the corridor, and everything changed. Marin remembered that moment. The heavy footsteps, the eyes through the bars, the overwhelming presence that had turned her forgotten cell into the center of the kingdom's attention. He sat outside my cell for 3 days, she said quietly. His wolf recognized you instantly. Kale fought it at first. He thought it was impossible, a mate bond with a prisoner he had never met. But the wolf would not yield. It has never yielded. Not for 1 moment in 7 months. The warmth in Marin's chest blazed with sudden heat, as if confirming every word. Hadrick's expression shifted then, and the relief that had softened his features dissolved into something grim. There is more, and it is not good. He placed a second document on the table. A letter, sealed with dark wax stamped with the Drevori serpent. We intercepted this from a courier 2 weeks ago. Marin read it. The healer has been located in the southern marshes. Dispatch the fangs. No survivors, no witnesses. The selection must be reinstated before the solstice. SD. The letters blurred as Marin's vision tunneled. The fangs are Drevori assassins, Hadrick said. The finest killers in the kingdom, and based on our intelligence, they are already in the marshlands. Through the cottage wall, the marsh wind shifted direction, and somewhere in the reeds, something that was not an animal moved through the water without making a sound. The attack came at dusk, when the marshlight turned everything to shadow and the water swallowed sound like a living thing. Marin was still in Dorrit's cottage when the first scream split the air. Not a scream of surprise, a scream that was cut short, bitten off at its peak, like a snapped branch. Hadrick moved before the sound had finished dying, his body coiled with the trained instinct of a wolf who had spent 30 years protecting kings. He seized Marin's arm and pulled her toward the back of the cottage. "How many exits?" he demanded. "One door. One window over the water. The window. Now." A second scream erupted from the settlement, followed by the unmistakable sounds of violence, steel on bone, bodies hitting water, the guttural snarls of wolves in combat. "The Verdant are healers," Marin gasped as Hadrick shoved her toward the window. "They cannot fight. They have no warriors." Which is exactly why the Drevoris chose to strike here. Hadrick's form blurred, his body expanded, clothing shredding as a massive dark-furred wolf replaced the man who had stood there a heartbeat before. He positioned himself between Marin and the cottage door, fangs bared, every muscle trembling with readiness. The door exploded inward. 2 wolves surged through the opening, their pelts black as pitch, their eyes flat and trained. Drevori fangs. They moved in perfect coordination, one high, one low, closing the space with lethal efficiency. Hadrick met the first mid-lunge. The impact shook the cottage walls. Reed and timber groaned as 2 massive bodies collided, jaws snapping, claws tearing. The second fang circled wide, ignoring the fight entirely. Its eyes were locked on Marin. She scrambled backward, her spine hitting the window frame. The assassin wolf advanced, lips peeled back over teeth that gleamed with something wet and unnatural. Poison. The same coated blades the Drevoris were famous for, applied to their wolves' fangs. One bite would be enough. Marin's hand flew to her chest. The bond was screaming inside her, pulsing with frantic heat, but the source of that heat was hundreds of miles away. No help was coming. Not in time. The wolf lunged, and Marin's hands came up without thought. The golden light erupted from her palms with a force that shocked even her. It was not the gentle glow she had used to heal children and mend bones. This was something raw and primal, a wall of radiance that slammed into the attacking wolf and hurled it through the cottage wall in an explosion of shattered reeds. The wolf hit the marsh water with a yelp that dissolved into silence. Marin stared at her hands. They were blazing, golden light pouring from her skin like she had swallowed the sun. The power roared through her veins, demanding release, demanding more. From outside, she heard Dorrit's voice rise above the chaos. The old healer was chanting. Not a healing song, but something older. Something that made the marsh water churn and the reeds bend inward like closing fingers. Hadrick dispatched his opponent with a savage twist of his jaws and shifted back to human form, bloodied and breathing hard. "How many?" Marin demanded. "I counted 8 entering the settlement. There will be more on the perimeter." Hadrick wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "Your power. Can you do that again?" Marin looked at her glowing hands. The light was already fading, the initial surge of adrenaline draining away. Her legs trembled. Her vision blurred at the edges. I do not know. Then we need to move. They climbed through the shattered wall into the marsh. The settlement was burning, small fires dotting the stilted dwellings like fallen stars. Marin could see verdant healers huddled in groups, their green-tinged magic forming weak barriers against the circling assassin wolves. They were losing. Marin's feet hit the wooden walkway, and she ran toward the nearest cluster of healers. 3 verdant women surrounded an injured man, their protective barrier flickering as 2 fangs prowled just beyond its reach. Get behind me, Marin commanded. The women stared at her. One of them opened her mouth to protest. Marin did not wait. She thrust her hands forward, and the golden light poured out of her in a wave that swept across the walkway like dawn breaking over the horizon. The 2 assassin wolves recoiled, their poisoned fangs snapping at empty air as the radiance drove them backward, searing their dark pelts. One fled into the reeds, the other held its ground, snarling. Marin pushed harder. The light intensified. She could feel it draining her, pulling from some well deep inside her chest that was not bottomless, that was in fact emptying with terrifying speed. But the wolf retreated. Step by step, it backed away, then turned and vanished into the darkness. A cheer rose from the healers. It died almost immediately. From the far edge of the settlement, where the reeds grew tallest and the water ran deepest, a figure emerged. Not a wolf. A woman, tall and lean, dressed in black leather that seemed to absorb the firelight. Her face was bare. No mask, no concealment. She wanted to be recognized. Marin had never seen her in person, but she knew. The silver blonde hair. The pale eyes like frozen mercury. The cruel, beautiful mouth curved in a smile that held no warmth. Seraphine Dravori. I must admit, Seraphine called across the burning settlement, her voice carrying with practiced ease. I expected this to be simpler. A forgotten girl hiding among swamp witches. How difficult could it possibly be? She tilted her head, studying Marin with the detached curiosity of someone examining an insect. But you are full of surprises, are you not? Glowing hands, hidden bloodlines, a wolf king losing his mind over a girl who does not even know what she is. Marin's power flickered. The golden light around her hands sputtered and dimmed. She was nearly empty. Seraphine saw it. Her smile widened. The light fades, little healer. And when it does, my fangs will finish what they started. She raised one elegant hand, and from the darkness behind her, more shapes materialized. 4, 6, 8 additional wolves, fresh and uninjured, forming a semicircle that closed around the settlement like a tightening fist. Marin's knees buckled. She caught herself on the walkway railing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The connection in her chest was burning so intensely she thought her ribs might crack. Hadric appeared at her side, bloodied and limping. We cannot hold this position. I know, Marin whispered. The fangs began to advance, and then the marsh itself went silent. Every frog, every insect, every nightbird. The entire Thornmere held its breath as if the world had paused between heartbeats. Marin felt it before she heard it. A vibration through the bond so powerful it buckled her knees completely. She hit the walkway hard, gasping, her hand clawing at her chest as the warmth inside her detonated into an inferno. He was here. The howl came from the north. It rolled across the marshlands like a living thing, deep and vast and carrying a fury so ancient it seemed to predate language itself. The water trembled. The reeds flattened. The fires guttering across the verdant settlement flickered sideways as if bowing before the sound. The Dravori fangs froze. Seraphine's composure cracked. For the first time, something other than calculated superiority crossed her face. Fear. Fall back, she commanded. Form defensive. She never finished. The reeds on the northern bank exploded outward as a wolf the color of midnight crashed through them like a battering ram through paper. He was enormous, larger than any of the fangs, larger than Hadric, larger than anything Marin had ever seen or imagined. His fur absorbed the firelight and gave nothing back. His eyes blazed with molten gold that left afterimages in the darkness. He did not slow down. He did not assess. He did not strategize. He simply destroyed. The first fang died before it could turn. The second managed a single snap of its jaws before those massive black paws crushed it into the walkway. The third and fourth broke formation and fled, but the dark wolf was faster, catching one by the haunch and sending it spiraling into the marsh water with a sound like a tree splitting. Behind him, more wolves poured from the reeds, dozens of them, the king's guard, their pelts ranging from silver to brown to russet, flooding the settlement with disciplined precision. They engaged the remaining fangs with brutal efficiency, while their king carved a path directly toward the center of the burning settlement, directly toward Marin. Seraphine drew a blade from her belt, short, silver-edged, coated with the telltale sheen of wolfsbane. She positioned herself between the advancing king and the walkway, where Marin knelt. "You cannot have her, Kale," Seraphine snarled. "The selection." The black wolf did not even break stride. He hit Seraphine with the full force of his charge, sending her sprawling across the walkway. The poisoned blade flew from her hand and disappeared into the dark water below. Two of the king's guard pinned her before she could rise. Hadric intercepted. "Take her to the perimeter, bind her, and hold her for transport." The guards dragged the struggling Seraphine into the darkness. She screamed threats and promises of retribution until the marsh swallowed her voice entirely. Then the wolf stopped. He stood 10 feet from Marin, chest heaving, muzzle flecked with blood. Around them, the sounds of battle were fading as the last fangs surrendered or fled. The settlement smoldered. Wounded healers groaned in the darkness. But the wolf saw none of it. Those blazing eyes were fixed on Marin with an intensity that made the air between them feel solid. She was kneeling on the broken walkway, her power spent, her body trembling with exhaustion. Blood from a cut she did not remember receiving trailed down her temple. Her hands, which had burned with golden fire, were dark and shaking. She looked nothing like a queen. She looked like a girl who had survived 2 years in a dungeon and 7 months in a swamp, and a battle she should not have lived through. The wolf approached her one step at a time. Each footfall was deliberate, gentle, as if the creature that had just torn through an army of assassins was terrified of frightening the woman before him. He stopped within arm's reach. And then the Alpha King of Sorvain, in his wolf form, the most powerful and feared being in 3 kingdoms, lowered his massive body to the ground. He lay flat before her, chin on the walkway, eyes lifted to hers, throat exposed. Total submission. From a wolf that had never submitted to anything in its existence. Marin's breath caught on a sob. Her hand reached out, trembling, and touched the fur between his ears. It was warm, impossibly soft beneath the blood and marsh grime. And the moment her fingers made contact, the bond in her chest stopped burning. It sang. A sound without sound. A vibration that resonated through every cell of her body, through the walkway beneath her, through the water and the reeds and the earth itself. The wolf pressed his great head into her palm and made a sound. Not a growl, not a whimper, but something between the two that held more grief and relief than any human word could contain. "You found me," Marin whispered. The golden eyes burned brighter, and the wolf did not move from her side. He shifted at dawn. Marin had fallen asleep against the railing of the walkway, her hand still buried in the black wolf's fur. She woke to the sensation of human fingers carefully, reverently, brushing hair from her face. Kale knelt before her in the gray morning light. Someone had brought him a cloak, though he seemed unaware of it. His dark hair was tangled, his jaw shadowed with weeks of sleeplessness, his cheekbones sharper than she remembered. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside and was only now remembering how to be solid again. His hand hovered at her temple, where the dried blood from her cut had crusted into a dark line. "You are hurt," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all authority. This was not the Alpha King speaking. This was just a man, kneeling before a woman, terrified of what she might say. "It is nothing. It is not nothing." His fingers trembled against her skin. "None of this is nothing, Marin." The sound of her real name in his mouth did something to her chest that she was not prepared for. She pulled back from his touch, and something fractured in his expression. "Do not," she said, her voice harder than she intended. "Marin. Do not touch me like you know me. Do not say my name like it belongs in your mouth." She pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest of every exhausted muscle. "You sat outside my cell for 3 days and then let them take me." The words hit him like a physical blow. She watched him absorb them, watched the guilt reshape his features into something raw and agonized. "I did not let them take you. You were not there. When Seraphine came with her guards and her council decree and her lies about enchantment, you were not there. And they dragged me out in chains and threw a hood over my head and loaded me into a cart like livestock, and you were not there. They told me there was a breach in the western wall, a coordinated attack." Kale's voice cracked. "I left your cell for 20 minutes to assess the threat. There was no breach. There was no attack. By the time I realized it was a diversion, I was gone." Marin's throat burned. "And I spent the next 7 months believing that you let it happen, that your wolf's fascination was a passing curiosity, that you realized a dungeon prisoner was not worth the trouble and allowed your council to dispose of me quietly. How can you think that?" The anguish in his voice seemed to fill the entire marsh. "I tore apart the eastern outpost with my bare hands looking for you. I dissolved the selection. I defied every noble house in the kingdom. I have not slept a full night in 7 months because every time I close my eyes, my wolf howls for a mate it cannot find. And yet here I am, alive, despite everything. Not because of you, because of strangers, because of healers in a swamp who owed me nothing and took me in anyway." Marin's voice shook with fury she had not known she carried. "Do you know what it is like to be forgotten, Kale? Not for 7 months, for 2 years. 2 years in that cell. 2 years of darkness and silence and chains while your kingdom celebrated above me. Where were you then?" The question landed between them like a dropped blade. Kale's face went white. "I did not know you existed," he whispered. "Exactly. I did not exist. Not to you, not to anyone. I was erased. Seraphine erased me, and your kingdom helped her do it because I was nobody worth remembering. You were never nobody. Then why did no one come?" The sob broke through before she could stop it. 2 years of compressed grief and isolation cracking open like a dam. 2 years, Kale. I counted every day. I scratched marks into the stone because it was the only proof I had that time was passing, that I was still real, that I had not simply ceased to exist. She pressed her fists against her eyes, hating the tears, hating the vulnerability, hating that this man she barely knew could reach inside her chest and pull out pain she had spent months learning to bury. 738 days. That is how long I spent in your dungeon. And the worst part was not the darkness. It was not the cold or the hunger or the chains. She dropped her hands and looked at him with eyes that blazed. The worst part was that I stopped expecting anyone to come. I accepted it. I made peace with the idea that I would die in that cell and no one would notice. Kale made a sound she had never heard from a living creature. Something between a growl and a keen, torn from a place so deep it seemed to come from his wolf rather than his human throat. "I failed you," he said. "Before I even knew you, I failed you. The dungeon is beneath my own castle. You were suffering under my roof, and I did nothing because I did not know to look. That is not good enough. I know. He did not defend himself, did not deflect, did not offer excuses. He simply knelt there, absorbing every blow she dealt, accepting every wound. I know it is not good enough, he repeated. Nothing I say will give you back 2 years. Nothing I do will erase what was done to you in my name, in my castle, under my authority. The guilt of that will follow me for the rest of my life. His hand moved to his own chest, pressing against the spot where the bond lived. But I need you to know something, Marin. Not as your king, not as an alpha, as the man whose wolf chose you before his mind even understood why. He looked up at her, and his eyes held nothing back. No walls, no pride, no royal armor. Just a man, stripped bare by 7 months of anguish. The moment I descended those stairs and my wolf caught your scent, every other reality ceased to exist. I did not choose this. My wolf did not give me options. It simply recognized the other half of my soul, and it has been screaming for you every moment since. Marin's anger faltered, not because his words were pretty, but because she could feel them through the bond. The raw, unfiltered truth of them pouring through the connection in her chest like warm water through cracked earth. He meant every word. The bond would not let him lie. I sat outside your cell for 3 days, Cale continued, because I was terrified. Terrified that what my wolf was telling me was real. Terrified of what it would mean for you, a prisoner, to be bound to a king who had failed to protect you. Terrified that if I opened that cell door, I would never be able to let you go. And then they took me anyway. And it nearly killed me. His voice was barely audible now. My wolf has been fighting me for control every day since. Some nights I shift without meaning to. I run until my paws bleed and my lungs burn and my body collapses. And still the wolf pushes me up again because you are out there somewhere, and he will not rest until he reaches you. Marin stared at him, the gaunt cheeks, the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands trembled as if holding his human form required active effort. He was telling the truth. Not just emotionally, but physically. The separation was destroying him. And if she was being honest with herself, truly, ruthlessly honest, it was destroying her too. I do not trust you, she said quietly. I know. I do not know you. 3 days through iron bars and a warm feeling in my chest do not constitute a relationship. I know that too. And I will not be collected like a missing possession and installed in your castle as if the last 2.5 years were simply an inconvenience to be smoothed over. I would never. Then what are you offering me, Cale? Because I am not a political prize. I am not a treaty. I am a woman who has been caged and erased and hunted, and I need to know that whatever comes next, I walk into it with my eyes open and my choices intact. Cale was quiet for a long moment. The marsh sounds filled the silence, water lapping, reeds whispering, the distant calls of waking birds. I am offering you the truth, he said finally. Every part of it, no matter how ugly. I am offering you my protection, not as a cage but as a choice you can accept or refuse, and I am offering you the one thing I have never given anyone. He reached out and took her hand, carefully, gently, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not pull away. I am offering you my throat, he said, my surrender, my absolute trust. You hold the power here, Marin, not me. You decide what we become. The bond between them hummed, not with fire, but with something quieter. Something that felt like the first warm day after an endless winter. Marin looked at the man kneeling before her, the king who had dismantled his own reign to find her, the wolf who had submitted to a woman he barely knew because his soul recognized hers. Then we start with the truth, she said. All of it. And you do not touch me again until I say you can. Kale's eyes glistened. Agreed. And if I decide that I cannot do this, that the bond is not enough, and the damage is too deep, you let me go. You let me walk away, and you do not follow. Something shattered behind his eyes, but he nodded. If that is what you choose, I will honor it, even if it kills me. Marin studied him for a long time. Then she released his hand and stood. Get up, she said. Kings do not kneel in swamps. The ghost of a smile crossed his ravaged face. This one does. But he rose, and when he stood before her, towering and broken and impossibly, infuriatingly sincere, Marin felt the smallest crack form in the wall she had built around her heart. She did not let him see it, but the bond knew. And somewhere deep inside her chest, it sang. They traveled north for 3 days. Kale had wanted to leave immediately, but Marin had refused to abandon the Verdant without ensuring the wounded were stabilized. She spent the first day moving between injured healers, her golden light dimmer than before but steady, closing wounds and drawing poison from wolf bites, while Kale watched from a distance he clearly found agonizing. He kept his word. He did not touch her, did not crowd her, did not attempt to accelerate a closeness she had not granted. But his wolf was another matter entirely. At night, when Marin tried to sleep in her reed cottage, she could hear him pacing outside. Not in human form. His wolf, circling her dwelling in an endless patrol, pausing at every window, every doorway, his breath a low constant that she felt through the wooden floor. On the second night, she opened her door. The black wolf sat 5 feet from her threshold, massive and still, eyes reflecting the marsh moonlight. You are keeping me awake, Marin said. The wolf's ears flattened with something that looked remarkably like guilt. If you are going to guard me, at least do it quietly. She turned back inside, leaving the door open. After a long pause, the wolf padded to the threshold and lay down across it, his enormous body blocking the entrance entirely. Marin slept better that night than she had in 7 months. She did not tell him that. Hadric organized the journey north with military precision. 50 of the King's Guard formed a protective perimeter around the traveling party, which included Maren, Kale, Dorrit, who had insisted on accompanying them with a stubbornness that reminded Marin of old tree roots, and a dozen verdant healers who refused to let their sister travel without support. Kale rode at the front of the column on a black warhorse, but Marin noticed that his head turned to check on her every few minutes. Each time their eyes met, the bond between them pulsed with a warmth that was becoming harder to dismiss. On the third evening, as the marshlands gave way to the rolling grasslands of Sorvain's southern provinces, a rider came galloping from the north with a face drained of color. My king. The scout's horse was lathered with sweat, its sides heaving. The capital has fallen. The words dropped like stones into still water. Kale's expression hardened into something Marin had not seen before. Not anguish, not vulnerability. Something far more dangerous. Explain, he said, and his voice carried the harmonic undertone of an alpha command. House Dravory moved 3 days ago. Lord Varek Dravory has seized the castle with the support of 4 allied houses. They are claiming the throne under an ancient succession law, that an alpha who refuses the selection forfeits his right to rule. That law has not been invoked in 600 years, Hadric growled. Lord Varek has the High Council's seal. Whether it is legitimate or coerced, the result is the same. He controls the castle, the treasury, and the capital garrison. Kale's horse stamped beneath him, responding to the rage that radiated from its rider. There is more, my king. The scout hesitated. Lord Varek has taken prisoners. Every servant and guard who remained loyal to you. Over 60 souls. He has declared that if you do not surrender yourself and submit to the council's authority by the solstice, 3 days from now, they will be executed as traitors. Marin's blood chilled. And he has specifically demanded that the woman called Marin be surrendered as well. He is calling her a witch, who has enslaved the king's wolf through forbidden magic. The people are being told she is the cause of everything: the failed selection, the kingdom's instability, the dissolution of alliances. The bond flared with Kale's fury. So hot, Marin gasped. "They have made me the villain," she said quietly. Kale turned to look at her. His eyes were molten, barely human. His wolf was surging beneath the surface, driven to the edge by the threat to his mate and his people. "They have made you a target," he corrected. "There is a difference. One is a story, the other is an act of war. Kale, if you ride into that city with me beside you, it confirms everything they are telling the people. The king bewitched, the foreign witch at his side. You will be fighting your own kingdom. I will be fighting traitors who have stolen my throne and imprisoned my people. What they call you is irrelevant. What you are is the truth." "And what am I?" The question came out before she could stop it. Smaller and more vulnerable than she had intended. Kale held her gaze across the distance between their horses. "You are my mate," he said. Not loudly, not as a proclamation, as a fact. Quiet, immovable, absolute. "And no one harms what is mine." Dorrit, riding a placid marsh pony at the rear of the column, caught Marin's eye and gave her a look that said, very clearly, "I told you so." Marin ignored her, but the crack in her wall widened by a fraction. "3 days," Hadric said, pulling alongside them. "It is not enough time to raise an army." "We do not need an army," Kale replied. "We need the truth. And we need to be inside those walls before the solstice." His eyes swept over the wolves assembled around him. 50 guards, a dozen healers, a marsh witch, and a woman the kingdom had been taught to fear. "The Dravoris believe they hold all the power. They are wrong." He looked at Marin. "They have never seen what happens when the bond answers a true threat." Marin did not know what he meant, but the warmth in her chest, steady, deep, burning with something far older than either of them, suggested that she was about to find out. They reached the walls of Kelvarin, the ancient capital of Cervane, as the solstice sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The city was beautiful and terrible. Spires of dark stone rose against the amber sky. Their banners changed from the king's black and silver to the Dravori crimson. Armed wolves patrolled the walls with crossbows and poisoned bolts. The great gates were sealed with iron and reinforced with chains thick as a man's arm. And from within, carrying over the walls on the cold evening air, came the sound of weeping. Kale's wolves had scouted the city through the night. Hadric delivered the intelligence with the grim efficiency of a soldier who had stopped being surprised by cruelty long ago. "The prisoners are being held in the Great Hall, 63 of them. Servants, guards, stable hands. Anyone who spoke the king's name with loyalty. Varek has them chained to the pillars. The execution is set for midnight." "And Seraphine?" Marin asked. "RN." Hadric's jaw tightened. "She escaped custody during the march north. 2 guards were found dead at a river crossing, throats cut while they slept. She reached her father's side 3 days before we arrived. She is calling herself Queen Designate." Marin closed her eyes. 63 people, chained in a hall she had never seen, condemned for the crime of loyalty to a king whose only offense was following his wolf's truth. Because of her. The thought settled into her chest like a stone. She had not asked for any of this. Had not asked to be born with healer's blood and a dormant wolf. Had not asked to be imprisoned, erased, hunted, or found. But the cost of her existence was being paid by people who had never known her name. "I will go in," she said. Every head turned. "Absolutely not," Kale said, and the alpha command vibrated through his voice with a force that made the wolves around him flinch. It did not touch Marin. The bond between them absorbed the command like water absorbing a stone, and she realized with quiet surprise that a true mate could not be commanded by her alpha. They want me, Kale, not you, me, the witch who stole the king's mind. If I present myself, Varric will have what he has been demanding. He will have no reason to execute the prisoners. He will have every reason to execute you. Not immediately. A public execution of the woman the kingdom blames requires a public trial. Varric needs legitimacy. He needs the people to see him as a just ruler removing a threat, not a butcher murdering a defenseless woman. That takes time. Time you can use. Kale's face was a war. She could see his wolf raging behind his eyes, every primal instinct screaming against allowing his mate to walk into the jaws of the enemy. Marin, I cannot. His voice broke. I just found you. After 7 months. I cannot watch you walk into that city and not know if I will see you again. She stepped toward him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough that the bond between them hummed with an almost audible frequency. You will see me again, she said, because you are going to come for me. That is what you do, Kale. You come for me. Every time. Through dungeons and marshes and armies. You come. She placed her hand on his chest, the first time she had voluntarily touched him since the marsh. His heartbeat slammed against her palm. His breath stopped. His eyes went wide and bright with something that was too vast to be called hope, and too fragile to be called certainty. Trust me, she said, the way you asked me to trust you. For a long, agonizing moment, Kale said nothing. Then he covered her hand with his own and pressed it harder against his heart. If they hurt you, he said, his voice barely a whisper, I will raise that city to its foundations. Every stone, every tower. I will leave nothing standing. I know, Marin said. That is why they will not hurt me, because they know it too. She turned to Hadric. Open a channel. Tell Varric the witch is surrendering. The great gates of Kelveran opened for Marin alone. She walked through them in the simple healer's dress she had worn in the marshes, her dark hair loose, her hands empty. No weapons, no armor, no escort. The bond in her chest stretched taut as a bowstring as each step carried her farther from Kale. She could feel his anguish bleeding through, a howl trapped in human form, a wolf clawing at the inside of a man who was using every ounce of his willpower to honor his mate's request. Dravori soldiers flanked her the moment she crossed the threshold. Rough hands seized her arms. Chains, iron, heavy, familiar, were clamped around her wrists. Welcome back to captivity, one of the soldiers muttered. Comfortable, is it? Marin said nothing. She let them lead her through the streets of a city she had never seen as a free woman. Citizens lined the roads, staring at the girl they had been told was a monster. Some faces held hatred, some held confusion. A few, buried in the back of the crowd, held something that might have been sympathy. The great hall of Kelvarin was vast. Pillars of dark stone rose to a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. And chained to those pillars, 63 prisoners lifted their heads as Marin was dragged inside. Lord Varric Dravori sat on the stolen throne. He was a large man, broad and graying, with the calculating eyes of someone who viewed people as currency. Beside him stood Seraphine, her silver blonde hair arranged in the elaborate coils of a queen. The witch delivers herself. Varric's voice echoed through the hall. How convenient. Release the prisoners, Marin said. You have what you demanded. I demanded the king's surrender as well. The king is not mine to surrender. I am offering you myself. The woman you blame for everything. Take me, and let the innocent go. Varric leaned back on the throne that did not belong to him, studying her with cold amusement. Seraphine tells me you have power, healing magic, a gift that runs in a bloodline you did not even know you carried. He gestured lazily. Show me. Marin's jaw tightened. My power is not a performance. Then perhaps we should provide you with motivation. Varek nodded to a guard, who dragged one of the prisoners forward. An old woman, gray-haired and trembling, her face bruised from rough handling. Heal her, or I add her to tonight's execution list. Marin looked at the old woman's terrified eyes and felt her power stir in her chest. Without hesitation, she knelt beside the prisoner and pressed her glowing hands to the woman's injuries. The golden light flowed, gentle and precise, erasing bruises and mending the cracked rib beneath. The prisoners murmured. The guards shifted uneasily, and Varek's expression changed from amusement to something hungrier. Remarkable, he breathed. Seraphine, you were right. This gift is wasted on a dungeon rat. Imagine what it could do in service to our house. Seraphine's smile was a blade. I told you, father. She is more valuable alive than dead. For now. The chains on Marin's wrists suddenly felt heavier. She was not a hostage. She was a prize. Before she could respond, the hall shuddered. A sound reached them through the stone, distant but growing. A howl, then another, then a dozen, then 100. Rising together in a chorus that vibrated through the pillars and rattled the iron chandeliers. Varek stood. What is that? The answer came as the great doors of the hall buckled inward with a sound like thunder. Kale had not waited for midnight. The doors held for 3 seconds. Then they burst from their hinges, and the great hall of Kilvarin became a battlefield. Wolves poured through the opening. The king's guard, gray and brown and silver, their eyes bright with focused fury. Behind them, moving with the calm, devastating purpose of a natural disaster, came the Black Wolf. Varek's guards rushed to form a defensive line. Seraphine screamed orders. Soldiers drew blades and knocked crossbows. And in the chaos, Marin felt something awaken inside her. Not her healing power. Something deeper. Something that had been dormant since birth. Coiled in the marrow of her bones, sleeping in the blood that connected her to a lineage 4 generations old. Her wolf. It surged without warning. Pain split through her body as bones began to shift, as muscles tore and reformed, as the chains on her wrists groaned against a force they were never designed to contain. No, Marin gasped, dropping to her knees. Not now. Not here. But the wolf would not be denied. It had waited too long. Decades of suppression, 2 years of captivity, 7 months of exile. It had endured all of it in silence, and now, with its mate fighting and its home burning and its enemies closing in, it refused to sleep 1 moment longer. The chains shattered. Not broke. Shattered. Iron links exploded outward in a burst of golden light as Marin's body completed a transformation she had never known she was capable of. Where a chained woman had knelt, a wolf stood. Her fur was white. Not silver, not pale gray. White as bone, white as starlight, white as the healing light she had carried in her hands since childhood. Her eyes blazed amber, bright enough to cast shadows, and she was not small. Later, those who witnessed it would say the white wolf was nearly as large as the king's midnight form. They would say the golden light that radiated from her fur illuminated the entire great hall like a second sun. They would say that when she lifted her head and howled, the sound was not a war cry. It was a homecoming. Across the hall, the black wolf stopped mid-battle. Those molten eyes found the white wolf through the chaos, and the bond between them detonated. Every wolf in the hall felt it, a shockwave of recognition, of completion, of 2 souls slamming together with a force that transcended the physical. Dravori soldiers dropped their weapons, overwhelmed by the primal authority of a true mate bond manifesting at full strength for the first time in living memory. Marin moved. Her wolf form was instinct and grace, power she had never trained but somehow knew. She lunged toward the nearest chained prisoner and bit through the iron links as if they were made of dry straw. Then the next. Then the next. The black wolf joined her. Side by side, midnight and starlight, they freed the prisoners one by one while the king's guard held the Dravori soldiers at bay. Varric tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Hadric, battered but unbroken, blocked the exit in wolf form. Seraphine drew her poisoned blade one final time. The white wolf turned to face her. The woman who had stolen 2 years of Marin's life, who had orchestrated her imprisonment, who had sent assassins to kill her in a swamp. The architect of every misery Marin had ever known. Seraphine's hand trembled. The blade wavered. The white wolf did not attack. She simply stood there, radiating a light so pure and overwhelming that Seraphine's arm dropped to her side. The blade clattered to the stone floor. It was not mercy. It was something more devastating. It was a wolf showing her enemy that she was no longer afraid. That the girl who had been caged and erased and forgotten had become something that could not be diminished. Seraphine sank to her knees, not in submission, in defeat. The great hall fell silent except for the sound of freed prisoners weeping with relief. And in the center of it all, the black wolf pressed his flank against the white wolf's side, and their bond settled into a harmony so deep that the stones beneath their feet seemed to hum with it. They shifted back to human form in the private chambers that had once been, and were now again, the king's own. Someone had thought to leave clothing. Marin dressed behind a screen while her body trembled with the aftershocks of a transformation she still could not fully comprehend. Her hands looked the same. Her face, reflected in the polished bronze mirror on the wall, looked the same. But everything beneath the surface had fundamentally changed. She was wolf now, fully, irrevocably wolf. A part of her that had been locked away since birth had broken free, and it moved through her blood like warm light, filling spaces she had not known were empty. When she emerged, Cale was standing by the window. He had dressed in simple black. No ceremonial silver, no crown, no trappings of authority. Just a man, watching the city he had reclaimed begin to breathe again. He turned when he heard her step. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The bond between them was no longer a thread. It was a river, vast and deep, flowing with a current that carried everything. His grief, her fury, his devotion, her resilience, every moment they had suffered apart, and every impossible choice that had brought them to this room. "You broke iron chains," Cale said quietly. "You broke down the doors of your own great hall. You were behind them. The doors never stood a chance." The corner of Marin's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Cale crossed the room slowly, stopping an arm's length away, honoring the boundaries she had set in the marsh. Marin. Her name and his voice still did things to her that she could not explain. The bond. You can feel what it is asking. She could. It pulsed between them with an urgency that was almost painful. The bond was alive, vast and incomplete. Like a bridge built from both sides of a canyon, meeting in the middle but not yet joined. It needed one final act to become permanent. A claiming. "I told you that I do not trust you," Marin said. "You did. I told you that I do not know you." Also true. "And I told you that if the damage was too deep, you would let me walk away." Cale's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Marin stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the faint silver scar on his throat where a Dravori blade had grazed him during the battle. Close enough to feel the heat of him, the restrained power, and the wolf that paced beneath his skin with aching need. "I do not trust you," she repeated. "But I trust the bond. I trust the wolf that would not leave my dungeon. I trust the man who knelt in a swamp and offered me his throat." She reached up and pressed her palm to his chest. His heartbeat galloped under her touch. "And I trust myself. That is something I have not been able to say in a very long time." Cale's eyes were bright, dangerously bright. His hand came up to cover hers and she let it. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I am saying that I choose this. Not because your wolf chose me, not because fate or bloodlines or ancient bonds decided it. Because I, Marin, am choosing you, Kale. With my eyes open, with my choices intact, on my terms." She rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to the place where his pulse hammered in his throat. Then her teeth found flesh. Kale's entire body went rigid. A sound tore from him. Not pain, not pleasure, but something beyond both. Something that resonated through the bond like a bell struck at the center of the earth. The bond completed. Marin gasped as it flooded through her. Not a trickle, not a river, an ocean. Kale's entire inner world poured into hers, and hers into his, and the boundaries between them dissolved into something shared and vast and permanent. She saw herself through his eyes, not a dungeon prisoner, not a forgotten girl, a woman of staggering courage who had survived horrors that would have broken lesser souls, a healer whose light was not just magic but character. The fundamental impulse to mend what was broken, to stand between the helpless and the harm, to walk into enemy strongholds alone because strangers needed saving. And he saw himself through hers. Not a failed king, not a wolf driven mad by an incomplete bond, a man who had made devastating mistakes and owned every single one. Who had offered his mate the one thing power holders almost never give, genuine choice, who had knelt in a swamp and meant it, who had let her walk into danger because she asked him to, and then torn the world apart to reach her when she needed him. When Marin pulled back, they were both weeping. Kale touched the claiming mark on his throat, already silvering over, a scar that would proclaim their bond to any wolf who saw it. "My queen," he said. The words held no command, only wonder. Marin touched the answering mark that had appeared on her collarbone, a warmth she had carried for 7 months, finally made visible. "My king," she replied, "but if you ever make a major decision without consulting me, I will bite you again." The sound that escaped Kale was, unmistakably, a laugh. The first real one, she suspected, in a very long time. He pulled her into his arms and she let him. Let herself be held by the man whose wolf had recognized her through iron bars and stone walls, and 7 months of desperate separation. Let the bond settle around them both like armor and warmth, and the unshakable promise of a future they would build together. Below them, the city was healing. In the weeks that followed, the Drevoris faced judgment before the assembled packs of Sorvain. Lord Varek was stripped of his title and exiled to the barren reaches beyond the kingdom's northern border, condemned to live without pack, without name, without the power he had schemed a lifetime to seize. Seraphine's fate was argued fiercely. Many called for execution. Marin, to the shock of the court, spoke against it. "She took 2 years of my life," Marin told the assembly. "Killing her will not return them. Exile her. Strip her wolf. Let her live as the nobody she tried to make me. That is a punishment she will feel every day." Kale had looked at her with something beyond love in that moment. Something like awe. Seraphine was exiled to the Thornmere marshes. The irony was not lost on anyone. Dorrit returned to the marshlands with her verdant healers, but not before pressing a small bundle of herbs into Marin's hands. "For when the little ones come," the old woman said with a knowing smile. Marin had blinked. "The little ones?" Dorrit had simply patted her cheek and walked away. 3 months later, Marin understood. The royal physicians confirmed what Dorrit's ancient senses had detected long before the signs became apparent. The bond completion had awakened something in Marin's body, a gift that true mate bonds, according to the oldest records, had always carried. Life. On a clear autumn morning, with the leaves of Sorvain turning gold and crimson and the kingdom finally at peace, Marin gave birth to a daughter. The child arrived howling, a sound so powerful that the wolves on the castle walls lifted their heads in instinctive response. She had her father's dark hair, her mother's amber-flecked eyes, and when the royal physician placed her in Kale's arms, the Alpha King of Sorvain, who had faced assassins and armies, and the destruction of his reign without flinching, wept without shame. "She has your light," Kale whispered, watching the faintest golden glow pulse beneath the infant's tiny fingers. "The healer's gift." Marin, exhausted and radiant, reached up to touch the claiming mark on his throat. It warmed under her fingers, as it always did. "She has your stubbornness," Marin replied. "She refused to arrive on the physician's schedule." Kale laughed and pressed his forehead to hers, their daughter cradled between them. "Thank you," he murmured, "for surviving, for fighting, for choosing me even when I gave you every reason not to." Marin closed her eyes. She thought of the dungeon, the darkness, the 738 marks scratched into stone. She thought of the marshes, and the burning thread in her chest, and the impossible journey that had brought a forgotten girl from a cell to a throne. "You sat outside my bars for 3 days," she said softly. "Your wolf knew before either of us did. I think I was always going to choose you, Kale. I just needed to be free enough to make the choice mean something." Outside their window, the wolves of Sorvain began to howl, not with anguish, not with rage, but with the deep, resonant joy of a pack that had found its center again. And in the great tapestry of the kingdom's history, a new thread was woven in gold and midnight black. The story of a girl who was forgotten by everyone except the wolf who found her. Of a king who dismantled his throne to reach the woman his soul had chosen. Of a bond that survived dungeons and betrayal and 7 months of impossible distance. They had found each other in the darkest place imaginable, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.